Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we're diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me or any of my unconventional beliefs, or if I lose you at any point in time with the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with Stanza 7 continued. 5. The spark hangs from the flame by the finest thread of Fohat. It journeys through the 7 worlds of Maya. It stops in the first kingdom and is a metal and a stone. It passes into the second kingdom, and behold, a plant. The plant whirls through 7 forms and becomes a sacred animal, the first shadow of the physical man. From the combined attributes of these, Manu, man, the thinker is formed. Who forms him? The 7 lives and the 1 life. Who completes him? The 5-fold Laha. And who perfects the last body? Fish, Sin, and Soma, the moon. The phrase, through the 7 worlds of Maya, refer here to the 7 globes of the planetary chain and the 7 rounds, or the 49 stations of active existence that are before the spark, or monad, at the beginning of every great life cycle, or manvantara. The thread of Fohat is the thread of life before referred to. Now, I'm going to point out, even though we have pointed it out several times, that I differ from what is being relayed here right now. This is the atomic existence on the first plane. This is the plant existence on the second plane. Then it goes to the animal existence on the third plane, but there is another animal existence which is with thought. That would be the 4th plane. And then the 5th plane is us with thought and time. So I differ with this by at least 1 degree. I believe that there are 7 different planes of existence here, with 1 more, the divine, being the all-encompassing on the outside of it. And so just pointing out once again that I differ with the differentiation here. This theory of spiritual evolution to me is a much more a better fit, we'll put it that way. This relates to the greatest problem of philosophy, the physical and substantial nature of life, the independent nature of which is denied by modern science because that science is unable to comprehend it. The reincarnationist and believers in karma alone dimly perceive that the whole secret of life is in the unbroken series of its manifestations, whether in or apart from the physical body, because if life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity, yet it is itself part and parcel of that eternity, for life alone can understand life. What is that spark which hangs from the flame? It is Yiva, the monad in conjunction with Manas, or rather its aroma, that which remains from each personality, when worthy, and hangs from Atma Buddhi, the flame, by the thread of life. In whatever way interpreted into whatever number of principles the human being is divided, it may easily be shown that this doctrine is supported by all the ancient religions, from the Vedic to the Egyptian, from the Zoroastrian to the Jewish. In the case of the last mentioned, the Kabbalistic works offer abundant proof of this statement. The entire system of the Kabbalistic numerals is based on the divine septenary hanging from the triad, thus forming the decade, and its permutations 7, 5, 4, and 3, which finally all merge into one itself, an endless and boundless circle. We have talked about the numbers plenty of times. We're not going to do it again, right? The only numbers that are really important to me are 1, 3, and 8, with 7 being 8, including the 1. And so for me, 1, 3, 8 are the principal numbers to pay attention to. The other numbers can be important as they go along, but the way that it is defined in here, I heartily disagree with most of the time. The deity, the ever-invincible presence, says the Zohar, manifests itself through the 10 Sephiroth, which are its radiating witnesses. The deity is like the sea from which outflows a stream called wisdom, the waters of which fall into a lake named intelligence. From the basin, like 7 channels, issue the 7 Sephiroth, for 10 equals 7. The decade contains 4 unities and 3 binaries. The 10 Sephiroth correspond to the limbs of man. When I framed Adam Kadmon, the Elohim were made to say, the spirit of the Eternal shot out of his body like a sheet of lightning, and that radiated at once on the billows of the 7 millions of skies, and my 10 splendors were his limbs. But neither the head nor the shoulders of Adam Kadmon can be seen. Therefore, we read in the Sephra Dizenothia, I don't know how to pronounce that, the book of the concealed mystery. In the beginning of time, after the Elohim, the sons of light and life, or the builders, had shaped out of the eternal essence the heavens and the earth, they formed the worlds 6 by 6, the 7th being Malkuth, which is our earth, see Mantuan Codex, on his plane, and the lowest on all of the other planes of conscious existence. The Chaldean Book of Numbers contains a detailed explanation of all of this. The first triad of the body of Adam Kadmon, the 3 upper planes of the 7, let's go ahead and pop out the footnote. The formation of the living soul, or man, would render the idea more clearly. A living soul is a synonym of man in the Bible. These are our 7 principles. Now, I'm going to have a slightly different explanation for this, right? The 3 upper planes, the 7 monads, the 7 circles, those mean different things to me. The planetary, that's fine. You can have that. I'm not going to dispute that that is a interpretation of it. But there is another interpretation of it, and I'm going to point it out because I haven't in this video yet. There are 7 internal chakras. They start from the bottom to the top: base, sacral, solar plexus, heart, throat, third eye, crown. I believe that those hold us together. It is electromagnetic emanation points of energetic distribution. Right? There is also another chakra which surrounds you. It is powered kind of by the 7 internal ones. If you have the 7 internal chakras in proper balance, then you can access the 8th one. The 3 upper planes that are being referred to here, which separate us from the other planes of existence, are 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So 5, 6, and 7 would be the 3 upper planes to me. Those, the ability to talk, the ability to see forward into the future, and the ability to receive from the divine, separate us from the animal kingdoms. That is the 3 above. There are 3 below, right? The base, the sacral, and the solar plexus deal more with the earthly side of things. The 3 above deal with the spiritual side of things. When you bring the 3 below into accordance with the 3 above, as below, so above, as above, so below, through the 3rd, which is the heart, which is number 4, right? You have 1 section, 2 sections, 3 sections. The Trinity being melded together as above, so below, through the heart into the divine is how manifestation happens. And so, for me, these 3 upper planes are going to be 5, 6, and 7 every time. The 7 monads, same thing to me, right? I understand that is not what they mean here. What they mean here is the planetary. That's fine. I have a different explanation for that. It makes more sense that your 7 internal chakras would affect you more than it does that Saturn will. The first triad of the body of Adam Kadmon, the 3 upper planes of the 7, cannot be seen before the soul stands in the presence of the Ancient of Days. Now, again, this leads more into me, right? In your meditative practices, you will get to the point of non-existence. That sounds a little bit funny, right? If you don't understand what I'm talking about, it's because you have not been there yet, but there is a point in meditation where you have to release if you are going to proceed, right? You can sit there all day and stay and do and not release, and it does no good. You can meditate all day for the rest of your life, every single day, and if you do not get to the point of release, it is not going to change anything. That point of release is trusting in the source to bring you back, right? You are quite literally deciding that it is okay if you don't come back. That is a little bit much for some people. That is as close to a death ritual as anything that I do is going to get, right? It is dying to yourself in a way. It is getting rid of the ego in a way, but it is submitting yourself to the creative source, right? That only happens when you're doing your balancing work, when you get to the point where you are at your throat into the third eye. If you're doing your balancing work from the heart down, you're not going to reach that point. It is only when you start to receive the upper limits of the spiritual that you start to get to the point where the release is necessary. To me, that is going to be the soul standing in the presence of the Ancient of Days. It is quite literally releasing yourself from yourself, right? Trusting the source with yourself, your soul, the part of you that is the individualized piece of divinity, not the temple. The temple doesn't matter. It is temporary. It is not the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is eternal. It is literally every atom in existence. It is the piece that is separated, the piece that is you, the piece that is making the decisions inside. And when you decide that you actually want to access that piece, you have to go through this process. I don't personally hold that you have to have some ritual or ceremony attached to it, right? The Masons have a ceremony where they die to the body. The others, we have talked about so many times going through these particular studies, they have that ritual, but that is because they are part of the group, and that is kind of a good thing, kind of not. I have an alternative view on the pyramids, right? It is entirely possible that they were built just because they were big. That is not highly likely, but it's possible. It is entirely possible that they were built for some reason that we don't understand. It is possible that they were a chemical formation, right? There is the Land of Chem, a channel on YouTube, does a very good job of explaining how it is entirely possible that the pyramids were used for creating nitrogen and ammonia, which are fertilizers, and that led to the agriculture in the Egyptian area. It is also possible that it was an initiation point, right? There are several different places. They are different colors, or at least they used to be. The stones that were on the outside of the pyramid, which are mostly gone now, were different colors, right? You had a red one, you had a white one, you had a black one, there was a green one. I believe that each one of those are a different step along the way of the ascension process, right? The coming to understand your soul, like I have talked about here, right? The giving away. It is entirely possible that the stone sarcophagus, which never held a body, inside of the king's chamber, I think it's the king's chamber, it might be the queen's chamber. Regardless, it is this giant stone box with a giant stone lid. If you think about it in terms of a sensory deprivation chamber, right? If you are locked in this box for however long, whether it be an hour or 3 days, you are going to experience extreme silence. Extreme silence will do strange things to you. Chances are that you have never been in an extreme silence situation, right? You have to deliberately set yourself in it. But you can literally hear the blood coursing through your veins, which by the way, is a very important step in the magic process. It allows you to interact with the isometrics of electromagnetic manipulation, right? Being able to cognize the flowing of the blood in your body, your heartbeat, and your breath, that makes a big difference, right? That is why some people, do the sensory deprivation thing. But it can make you hallucinate. It can make you do other things, because people, as a general rule, are not set up for that type of silence, right? Everything completely. Like you're inside of a box with walls a foot thick, right? inside of a pyramid of hundreds of feet, at a minimum, of stone all the way around you. There is no sound whatsoever. That could very well have been part of an initiatory process just as much as the other clubs use. That is my own personal favorite conspiracy about it. I believe that each one of the different pyramids probably had a different function along the same lines. It almost certainly is an initiatory thing. It could be chemicals, but there's no reason for the sarcophagi to be in there if it was chemicals. Right? Just to point out that these societies have this same type of situation. I don't have the ceremonies. I don't have the rituals. I didn't need that because I did the thing without them. That doesn't mean that it is a totally unnecessary tool, right? But because people are different, right? What works for me may not work for you. I try to put out what works for me for the people that it works for to find. But it could be something completely different for you than it was for me. All of this to say that that particular part of the initiatory ceremony is not necessarily useless, but not necessarily required either, right? You have to give up the control. That is the main part. And all of those ceremonies are about giving up that control. The way that I do it and the way that they did it don't have to be the same as long as the result comes out the same. All right, back to the text. The Sephiroth of this upper triad are, 1, get there, the crown, represented by the brow of Micro-Prosperos. Chokmah, wisdom, a male principle, by his right shoulder. And 3, Bina, intelligence, a female principle, by the left shoulder. Now, to me, this is not going to be wisdom and intelligence, right? It's going to be seeing forward and speaking power. That is, to me, 1, 2, and 3. 3, not 3. This would be 4, right? And now, this is coming from the top down. I normally go from the bottom up, but that's, again, not even really that relevant. Then come these 7 limbs, or Sephiroth on the planes of manifestation. The totality of these 4 planes being represented by Micro-Prosperous. The lesser face, or Tetragrammaton, the 4-lettered mystery. The 7 manifested and the 3 concealed limbs are the body of the deity. Now, once again, 7 and 3 would be 1, 2, and 3. Now, the heart and the divine are linked, right? Your heart literally feeds into the divine chakra, helps to keep it balanced. If your heart is balanced, and the other 6 plus the heart, which makes 7, if you have the 7 internal balance, then it feeds out into the divine chakra, right? Some people call it the Merkaba, same thing. It is a encapsulation, but it is you that emanates that encapsulation. It is you that holds it together. As much as it holds you together, you hold it together too. All right. Thus, our Earth, Malkuth, is both the 7th and the 4th world. The former when counting from the first globe above, the latter if reckoned by the planes. It is generated by the 6th globe, or Sephiroth, named Yesod, foundation, or, as said in the book of Numbers, by Yesod, he, Adam Kadmon, fecundates the primitive Eva, Eve, or our Earth. Rendered in the mystic language, this is the explanation why Malkuth, called the inferior mother, Matrona, queen, and the kingdom of the foundation, is shown as the bride of Tetragrammaton, or Micro-Prosperous, Prosopis, the second logos, the heavenly man. When free from all impurity, she will become united with the spiritual logos. In example, in the 7th race of the 7th round, after the regeneration on the day of Sabbath. For on the 7th day has again an occult significance undreamt of by our theologians. When Matronitha, the mother, is separated and brought face to face with the king in the excellence of the Sabbath, all things become one body, says verse 746 in chapter 22 of Ha-Idrazuta Kadisha, becomes one body, means that all is reabsorbed once more into the one element, the spirits of men becoming nirvanis, and the elements of everything else becoming again what they were before, protile or undifferentiated substance. Sabbath means rest or nirvana. It is not the seventh day, but after 6 days, but a period the duration of which equals that of the 7 days, or any period made up of 7 parts. Thus, a pralaya is equal in duration to the manvantara, or a night of Brahma is equal to this day. If the Christians will follow Jewish customs, they ought to adopt the spirit and not the dead letter thereof. An example, to work 1 week of 7 days and rest 7 days. What? That is not what the Bible says. Right. Now, we have done a Bible study, and while I do not agree with many things in there, I don't like it when it is misrepresented to say things that it doesn't, right? The Bible is quite explicit about the fact that you are to work 6 days and rest on the 7th, right? You can argue with that all you want, but that is literally what the text says. You're to work 6 years and then take the 7th off, right? That is the Sabbath as well. There are grand cycles where it doesn't quite add up to 50 or to 49. You want to know why? Because 8 is the number, not 7. That the word Sabbath had a mystic significance is shown in the contempt shown by Jesus for the Sabbath day and by what is said in Luke 18:12. Sabbath is there taken for the whole week. See Greek text where the week is called Sabbath. I fast twice in the Sabbath. Paul, an initiate, knew it well when referring to the eternal rest and felicity in heaven as Sabbath. And their happiness will be eternal, for they will ever be one with the Lord, and will enjoy an eternal Sabbath. That would be an eternal rest. And while Paul has absolutely no authority when it comes to anything Jesus related, right? We have talked about that many times. Paul never met the man, right? He met a spirit, he met an entity. It could have been the entity that was Jesus. It could not have been, right? He didn't know what the dude looked like. He took it for granted that this entity told him the truth, and that is a foolish thing to do in almost every single instance. The difference between the two systems, taking the Kabbalah as contained in the Chaldean Book of Numbers, not as misrepresented by its now disfigured copy, the Kabbalah of the Christian mystics, the Kabbalah and the archaic esoteric Vidya, is very small indeed, being confined to unimportant divergences of form and expression. Thus, Eastern occultism refers to our earth as the fourth world, the lowest of the chain, above which run upward on its sides the 6 globes, 3 on each side. The Zohar, on the other hand, calls the earth the lower, or the 7th, adding that upon these 6 depend all things which are in it, micro-prosperous. The smaller face, smaller because manifested and finite, is formed of 6 Sephiroth, says the same work. 7 kings come and die in the thrice destroyed world, Malkuth, or earth, destroyed after each of the 3 rounds which it has gone through. There are several different indigenous peoples across the world that have differing opinions on this. Some of them say 3, some of them say 4, some of them say 5. But it is almost certain that there is a repeating pattern of destruction, right? See the 12,000 year disaster cycle for more information on that. But it is almost certain that this is a thing that happens. There are many reasons to believe this, most of them scientific, so you can check it out at your leisure. We talk about it in some extensive detail. But it is entirely possible that it was 3 times. It is more likely that it was more than 3 times. And their reign of the 7 kings will be broken up. Book of Numbers 1:8-3. This relates to the 7 races, 5 of which have already appeared, and 2 more have still to appear in this round. And again, that is not what Numbers says. The Shinto allegorical accounts of cosmogony and the origin of man in Japan hint at the same belief. Captain C. Pafundes studied for nearly 9 years in the monasteries of Japan the religion underlying the various sects of the land. The Shinto idea of creation, he says, is as follows. Out of chaos, Kanton, the earth, in, was the sediment precipitated, and the heavens, Yo, the ethereal essences which ascended. Ma'a, Yin, appeared between the two. The first man was called Kuni To, Ko Tachi no Mikoto, and 5 other names were given to him, and then the human race appeared, male and female. Izanagi and Izanami begat Tinshoko Doijin, the first of the 5 gods of the earth. These gods are simply our 5 races. I'm very interested to see how she breaks down these 5 races without being racist. Izanagi and Izanami being the 2 kinds of the ancestors, the 2 preceding races which give birth to animal and to rational man. Now, if this is implying that we went from elementary to plant to animal to human, then fine. If this is saying that there were previous races of men, I'm going to be a hard sell, right? I believe that God created all of us at the same time in our differing ways for differing purposes. That my melanin level and your melanin level really don't make that much of a difference in anything other than giving us the particular hardships which we, the people, attribute to them. And so I don't believe that you are intrinsically less than me if you have more melanin or if you have less. Either way, doesn't matter to me. If this is a melanin-based races, I'm going to be very upset, right? What it appears to be is talking about the spiritual evolution of man, going farther into the different epochs. And I don't have a problem with that, right? The people from pre-flood were going to be different from people after the flood. People from pre-Eden would be different from people post-Eden. I don't have a problem with that. As long as it is not melanin-based or even locality-based, it's going to be okay, right? Everybody is a human, and so I don't have a problem with the differentiations. All right. It will be shown, Volume 2, Part 2, that the number 7, as well as the doctrine of the septenary constitution of man, was preeminent in all the secret systems. It plays as an important part in Western Kabbalah as in Eastern occultism. Eliphas Levi calls the number 7 the key to the Mosaic creation and the symbols of every religion. This is the key word there. It is almost entirely certain that Moses did not write Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, right? It is almost a positive thing that this was an amalgamation of stories taken from other places and then used to justify the eradication of the indigenous peoples in the Levant. That is a good way to put that. And so I do not give a whole lot of credence to anything that is based simply because it comes from the Jews or Kabbalah or Mosaic. I don't. It is a good place to learn some pieces of history, but even that has been severely distorted. And if any of that confuses you, check out the Bible study where we went through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy and talked about all of that quite extensively. He shows the Kabbalah following faithfully even the septenary division of man, as the diagram he gives in his Clef des Grands Mysteries is septenary. I'm gonna say something here that is going to be more than a little bit controversial. Right? I believe that the religions, all of them, are created for control, just as much as the governments are, right? They are meant to guide you in a direction, and that direction may or may not be correct. Whatever your particular belief is, you probably have something that someone else believes that is exactly contrary to your belief, right? Your religion is designed to point you in that direction. That doesn't mean that it is necessarily true. It means that the religion was formed intentionally in order to guide people in a specific direction. I give the best possible attribution, right? When we did the Bible study, we said quite often that Moses probably didn't write this, but we're going to attribute it to him with good faith, as if he did. If that is true, and Moses did write those books, he was forming a religion. First off, Judaism did not exist prior to him. And he was trying to separate his people from the peoples around him. If you read through the commandments and the laws, there are some things in there you're like, why do you even have to tell people that? Because people were doing it. Right? It is important to note that not everything is covered under that. There's only one type of homosexuality that is against the law according to the law. You should check that out. It is perfectly fine for a woman and a woman. It is not okay for a man and a man. I wonder why. They didn't have 7 wives. They weren't doing dirty things with them 7 wives. So, if you think that your depravity is unique to us, you are wrong. The human nature has always been the same. And so, back in the days when men had 7 wives, you can pretty enthusiastically assume that those 7 wives, while probably not all at the same time, were at least part of the time involved at the same time. And so, they didn't outlaw that particular thing. There are many examples of things like that. You can go back and check it out. I know I stepped on somebody's toes. I do not care. This may be seen as at a glance on page 389. That was all to say that the religions are pointing you in a specific direction. If you don't learn to look in the other direction, you're probably going to miss some things. On est prophétique et diverses pensées de paracel. However cleverly the correct thought is veiled. The prophecy is diverse, according to the seer, I think, close. One needs only to look at the diagram, plate 7 in Mr. Mather's Kabbalah. The formation of the soul. Let's check out the footnote. Nefesh is the breath of animal life breathed into Adam, the man of dust. It is consequently the vital spark, the informing element. Without manas, or what is miscalled in Levi's diagram, nefesh, instead of manos, the reasoning soul, or mind, atma buddhi are irrational on this plane and cannot act. It is buddhi, which is the plastic mediator, not manas, the intelligent medium between the upper triad and the lower quaternary. The upper 3 and the lower 4. That's counting the heart in the lower 4, which I don't, right? It is base, sacral, solar plexus. That is the lower 3. The heart is separate but connected with the divine. And then the throat, the third eye, and the crown are the upper 3. So it is an upper triad and a lower triad, not a quaternary to me. But there are many such strange and curious transformations to be found in the Kabbalistic works. A convincing proof that its literature has become a sad jumble. We do not accept the classification except in this one particular, in order to show the points of agreement. And back to the text. From the same Key of the Great Mysteries by Levi to find the same, though with a different interpretation. Thus it stands with both the Kabbalistic and occult names attached. Now, you cannot make out all of this, right? This says pure spirit and Atma. This has Ruach, spiritual soul, Buddhi. Nefesh, I don't know, Manas. The original material will be linked down below to come back and peruse this at your leisure, right? Then we have here is 4 and 3, right? Which this would be a unifying point. Right, so maybe that can represent heart, but that's called 2. Right. All right. We will now give in tabular form what the very cautious Eliphas Levi says in explanation of his diagram, and what the esoteric doctrine teaches, and compare the two. Levi, 2, makes a distinction between Kabbalistic and occult pneumatics. See History de la Magie. First column, says Eliphas Levi, the Kabbalist. Kabbalistic pneumatics. The soul, or ego, is a clothed light, and this light is triple. Neshama, pure spirit. Ruach, the soul or spirit. Nefesh, plastic mediator. We'll check out that footnote here. That is going to be here. Eliphas Levi has, whether purposely or otherwise, confused the numbers. With us, his number 2 is number 1, spirit. And by making of nefesh both plastic mediator and life, he thus makes in reality only 6 principles, because he repeats the first 2. That is one of the mistakes. 5. The garment of the soul is the rind, body, of the image, astral soul. 6. The image is double, because it reflects the good as the bad. 7. Imago, body. Occult pneumatics, as given by Eliphas Levi. 1. Nefesh is immortal because it renews its life by the destruction of forms. But nefesh, the breath of, first column continued on, next page, second column. What? First column continued from last page. Life is a misnomer and a useless puzzle to the students. Ruach progresses by evolution of ideas. Neshama is progressive without oblivion and destruction. 4. The soul has 3 dwellings. These dwellings are the plane of the mortals, the superior Eden, and the inferior Eden. The image, man, is a sphinx that offers the riddle of birth. The fatal image, the astral, endows nefesh with its aptitudes, but Ruach is able to substitute for this vitiated nefesh on this image. First, wow, I do not like this formatting. The body is the mold of the nefesh. Nefesh is the mold of Ruach. Ruach, the mold of the garments of Neshmak. Light, the soul, personifies in clothing itself with a body, and personality endures only when the garment is perfect. The angels aspire to become men. A perfect man, a man-God, is above all the angels. Every 14,000 years, the soul rejuvenates and rests in the Jubilean sleep of oblivion. There's some speculation for you. All right, let's get back up here. Where were we? All right, right here. Second column. Say the Theosophist. Esoteric pneumatics. Ditto. For it is the Atma Buddhi Manas. Ditto with a footnote. Esotericism teaches the same, but Manas is not nefesh, nor is the latter the astral, but the 4th principle. It is also the 2nd prana, for nefesh is the breath of life. In man, as in the beast or insect, a physical material life which has no spirituality in it. The 4th would be the heart, right, in my numbering, and that would indeed be in charge of the breath. I wonder where that happens. All right. Spiritual soul, mediator between spirit and its man, the seat of reason, the mind, and man. 5. Correct. 6. Too uselessly apocalyptic. Why not say that the astral reflects the good as well as the bad man? Man, who is ever tending to the upper triangle, or else disappears with the quaternary. 7. Ditto the earthly image. Occult pneumatics, as given by the occultist. Manas is immortal because after every new incarnation it adds to Atma Buddhi something of itself, and, second column continued on next page. All right, that's going to be right here. Thus, assimilating itself to the monad, shares its immortality. Buddhi becomes conscious by the accretions it gets from Manas after every new incarnation and the death of man. Atma neither progresses, forgets, nor remembers. It does not belong to this plane. It is but the ray of light eternal which shines upon and through the darkness of matter when the latter is willing. 4. The soul, collectively, as the upper triad, lives on 3 planes, besides its 4th, the terrestrial sphere, and it exists eternally on the highest of the 3. These dwellings are earth, for the physical man or the animal soul; Kamaloka, Hades, the limbo, for the disembodied man or his shell; Devakan, for the higher triad. Correct. 6. Correct. 7. The astral, through desire, is ever drawing manas down into the sphere of material passions and desires. But if the better man, or manas, tries to escape the fatal attraction and turns its aspirations to atma, spirit, then buddhi, ruach, conquers and carries manas with it to the realm of eternal spirit. It is very evident that the French Kabbalist either did not know sufficiently the real tenet, or distorted it to suit himself and his object. Thus, he says again, treating upon the same subject, and we, occultists, answer the late Kabbalist and his admirers. 1. The body follows the whims, good or bad, of manas. Manas tries to follow the light of buddhi, but often fails. Buddhi is the mold of the garments of Atma, because Atma is no body or shape or anything, and because buddhi is its vehicle only figuratively. The monad, too. The monad becomes a personal ego when it incarnates, and something remains of that personality through manas, when the latter is perfect enough to assimilate buddhi. 3. Correct. 4. Within a period, a great age, or a day of Brahma, 14 Manus reign, after which comes Pralaya, when all the souls rest in nirvana. Souls equal egos. Such are the distorted copies of the esoteric doctrine in the Kabbalah. But see also the primeval Manus of humanity in Book 2. To return to stanza 7. A well-known Kabbalistic aphorism runs, a stone becomes a plant a beast, the beast a man a spirit, and the spirit a god. To me, that is missing some steps and including one extra, right? The stone becomes a plant, that is 1 to 2. The plant becomes an animal, that is 2 to 3. The animal becomes a better animal, that is 3 to 4. Then it becomes a human, right? Then it becomes a man, that would be 5. Then possibly is the disincorporated spirits in the realm of the elementals, which is 6. And then are the entities, or the angels, demons, aliens, whatever you call them. That would be 7. And then God, the divine, is 8. That is the overarching, encompassing, infinite, right? The 8 is the symbol of infinity. That is, it is also 0, which is the point from which everything becomes, right? The spark animates all the kingdoms in turn before it enters into and informs divine man, between whom and his predecessor, animal man, there is all the difference in the world. Genesis begins its anthropology at the wrong end, evidently for a blind, and lands nowhere. Had it begun, as it ought, one would have found in it first the celestial logos, the heavenly man. Oh wait, we missed a footnote. Anthropology at the wrong end, evidently for a blind, and lands nowheres, is a footnote. The introductory chapters of Genesis were never meant to represent even a remote allegory of the creation of our earth. They embrace a metaphysical conception of some indefinite period in the eternity, when successive attempts were being made by the law of evolution at the formation of universes. The idea is plainly stated in the Zohar. There were old worlds which perished as soon as they came into existence, were formless, and were called sparks. Thus, the smith, when hammering the iron, lets the sparks fly in all directions. The sparks are the primordial worlds which could not continue because the sacred aged, Sephira, had not yet assumed its form of androgyne or opposite sexes, of king and queen, Sephira and Cadmon. And the master was not yet at his work. So God wasn't working when he formed the universe. I got you. See Zohar, Idra Sutra, Book 3, page 292. B. The supreme consulting with the architect of the world, his logos, about creation. Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, page 421. We have already covered Isis Unveiled. You should check it out. Yeah, this is just funny to me, right? Like, this is speculation, right? I don't knock speculation, but we have to recognize it as speculation. Anything dealing with prior to existence is going to be speculation. It doesn't matter whether you have had a divine revelation or if I have. Either way, it is still going to be speculation. I have things that have been directly revealed to me that I have put into practical application, and because I have been able to put them into practical application, I take those as facts, right? You don't have to. I try to point out, hey, this came from something that was revealed to me. So you can put it to the test and see whether it is true for you or not. But there are things that I speculate about, right? We talk often about I had a spiritual experience where I was pulled out of my body and I saw the creation of the universe. What I saw could be completely a figment of my imagination. I'm fully aware of that. And so I try to hold that in my mind, even though I don't believe so, right? There are many reasons why I don't. I have outlined those before, but I was both conscious and not in my body. I was aware of my body, but I was not in my body. It's impossible for me to have intentionally created that for myself. I have aphantasia. That is something that I am recovering from, but I am not recovered from even now. I cannot willfully envision a thing, right? Not the simplest thing. Like, I can't look at this glass of tea, close my eyes, and see that glass of tea. That fast, it is gone. I cannot do it as much as I try. I can now, through intense exertion and manipulation, change the colors of the view field. That is as far as I have gotten in repairing the aphantasia. And so it is quite literally impossible for me to willfully imagine anything. I was not asleep whenever I had the experience. And because I was not asleep and I saw things, I take it as being shown things. But again, that could be a hallucination. That could be a speculation. I don't believe so, but it is possible. And because it is possible, I don't stand on the formation of the universe as strongly as I do the electromagnetic manipulations, right? I cannot go back in time and see it actually play out the way in which I saw it play out. And so I take it as a speculation. It is something that I believe did happen, but that doesn't mean that it was the exact way that it happened. That is an important thing to point out because Genesis, the first book, the exact same thing. It is someone's interpretation of what they believe happened. The same with the Zohar. The same with the Vedas. The same with anything that is dealing with prior to being here. You can ruminate, you can speculate, you can dissertate all you want, but it doesn't make it true. All right. All the way back up here. Had it begun, as it ought, one would have found in it, first, the celestial logos, the heavenly man, and we do not know that that did not happen, right? It is a speculation, which evolves as a compound unit of logoi, out of whom, after their pralaic sleep, a sleep that gathers the ciphers scattered on the Mayavic plane into one, as the separate globules of quicksilver on a plate blend into one mass. The logoi appear in their totality as the first, male and female, or Adam Kadmon, the fiat lux of the Bible, as we have already seen. But this transformation did not take place on our earth, nor on any material plane, but in the spatial depths of the first differentiation of the eternal root matter. Again, that is a very technical way to say I am speculating. On our nascent globe, things proceeded differently. The monad, or Yiva, as said in Isis Unveiled, Volume 1, page 302, is, first of all, shot down by the law of evolution into the lowest form of matter, the mineral. After a sevenfold gyration encased in the stone, or that which will become mineral and stone in the fourth round, it creeps out of it, say, as a lichen, passing thence through all the forms of vegetable matter into what is termed animal matter. It has now reached the point in which it has become the germ, so to speak, of the animal. That will become the physical man. All this, up to the third round, is formless as matter and senseless as consciousness. For the monad, or Yiva, per se, cannot even be called spirit. It is a ray, a breath of the absolute, or the absoluteness, rather, and the absolute homogeneity, having no relations with the conditioned and relative finiteness, is unconscious on our plane. Therefore, besides the material which will be needed for its future human form, the monad requires a spiritual model or prototype for that material to shape itself into, and b, an intelligent consciousness to guide its evolution and progress, neither of which is possessed by the homogeneous monad, or by senseless, though living matter. And again, this is all speculation. We do not know that plants do not have senses. As a matter of fact, there are very good reasons to believe that they do indeed have senses. The root networks, the mycelium networks that run beneath our feet are extensive. The atom of dust requires the soul of life to be breathed into him, the two middle principles, which are the sentient life of the irrational animal and the human soul. For the former is irrational without the latter. It is only when, from a potential androgyne, man has become separated into male and female, that he will be endowed with this consciousness, rational individual soul, manas, the principle or the intelligence of the Elohim, to receive which he has to eat of the fruit of knowledge from the tree of good and evil. How is he to obtain all this? The occult doctrine teaches that while the monad is cycling on downward into matter, these very Elohim, or Pitris, the lower Dayan Koans, are evolving pari passu with it on a higher and more spiritual plane, descending also relatively into matter on their own plane of consciousness. When, after having reached a certain point, they will meet the incarnating senseless monad, encased in the lowest matter, and blending the two potencies, spirit and matter, the union will produce that terrestrial symbol of the heavenly man in space, perfect man. We're going to leave that. The electric universe has a very good reason, or a very good explanation of what the heavenly man may be, and it was probably something along the lines of a polar alignment of the seven worlds. In the Sankhya philosophy, Purusha, spirit, is spoken of as something impotent unless he mounts on the shoulders of Prakriti, matter, which, left alone, is senseless. But in the secret philosophy they are viewed as graduated, though one and the same thing in their origin, spirit and matter. When once they are on the plane of differentiation, begin each of them their evolutionary progress in contrary directions, spirit falling gradually into matter, and the latter ascending to its original condition, that of pure spiritual substance. Both are inseparable, yet ever separated. In polarity, on the physical plane, two like poles will always repel each other, while the negative and positive are mutually attracted. So do spirit and matter stand to each other, the two poles of the same homogeneous substance, the root principle of the universe. Therefore, when the hour strikes for Purusha to mount on Prakriti's shoulders for the formation of the perfect man, rudimentary man of the first 2.5 races, being only the first, gradually evolving into the most perfect of mammals, the celestial ancestors, entities from preceding worlds called in India the Shishta, step in on this R-plane as the Pitris had stepped in before them for the formation of the physical or animal man, and incarnate in the latter. Thus, the two processes for the two creations, the animal and the divine man, differ greatly. The Pitris shoot out from their ethereal bodies still more ethereal and shadowy similitudes of themselves, or what we should now call doubles or astral forms, in their own likeness. We have a footnote. Read in Isis, Volume 2, pages 297 to 303, the doctrine of the Codex Nazareus. Every tenet of our teaching is found there under a different form and allegory. This furnishes the monad with its first dwelling, and blind matter with a model around upon which to build henceforth. But man is still incomplete. From Swayambhuva, Manu, in Manu Book 1, from who descended the 7 primitive Manus, or Prajapati, each of whom gave birth to a primitive race of men, down to the Codex Nazareus, in which Karabtanos, or Fetahil, blind concupiscent matter, begets on his mother Spiritus, 7 figures, each of which stands as the progenitor of one of the primeval 7 races. This doctrine has left its impress on every archaic scripture. Who forms Manu, the man, and who forms his body? The life and the lives, sin and the moon. Sin has a footnote. The word sin is curious, but has a particular occult relation to the moon, besides being its Chaldean equivalent. Here, Manu stands for the spiritual, heavenly man, the real and non-dying ego in us, which is the direct emanation of the one life, or the absolute deity. That would be the soul, the individualized piece of the divinity, which is you. As to our outward physical bodies, the house of the tabernacle of the soul, the temple of God, the doctrine teaches a strange lesson, so strange that unless thoroughly explained and as rightly comprehended, it is only the exact science of the future that is destined to vindicate the theory fully. It has been stated before now that occultism does not accept anything inorganic in the cosmos. The expression employed by science, inorganic substance, simply means that the latent life slumbering in the molecules of the so-called inert matter is unrecognizable. All life is life, and every atom of even mineral dust is a life, though beyond our comprehension and perception because it is outside the range of laws known to those who reject occultism. This is a problem of definition, right? Organic, according to science, means containing life, breath, the electric energy, and carbon. So, the not understanding that life means energetic investment of any sort is going to be the main differentiation point here, right? Helium, for instance, does not contain carbon unless it is a compound, but it does contain movement, and that movement would be life. That would be the electromagnetic emanations of the one Holy Spirit. And so this definition of organic life merely means that it is like human, animal, plant. It has the movement essence that we have, the electromagnetic now into next, plus carbon. The very atoms, says Tyndall, seem instinct with a desire for life. And that right there can be formulated by the chemical bonds that happen naturally, right? The procreation of water from hydrogen and oxygen is a very good example, right? You can separate those, right? You can take the very atoms and separate them, but left to their own accord, they will congeal again and become condensation. That is a desire for life, right? That is the instinct with the desire for life. The forming of the chemical bonds through ionics and whatever else methods there are, that is the desire for life. That is when I talk about the first realm of spiritual evolution, that is what I am talking about, right? The individualized atom is part of the Holy Spirit. Every single atom in existence is part of the Holy Spirit. The electromagnetic foundations of creation. The movement of the electron around the nucleus, that is the Holy Spirit in action. That is turning the now into the next. And so, to me, that is the life. Doesn't have to be for you, again, but that is what they are relaying here. Whence, then, we would ask, comes the tendency to run into organic form? Is there any way explicable, except according to the teachings of occult science? The worlds, to the profane, says a commentary, are built up of the known elements. To the conception of an arhat, these elements are themselves collectively a divine life. Distributively, on the plane of the manifestations, the numberless and countless crores of lives. We will check out that footnote. Oh, that's right here. Is Pasteur unconsciously taking the first step towards occult science and declaring that, if he dared express his full idea upon this subject, he would say that the organic cells are endowed with a vital potency that does not cease its activity with the cessation of a current of oxygen towards them, and does not, on that account, break off its relations with life itself, which is supported by the influence of that gas. I would add, goes on Pasteur, that the evolution of the germ is accomplished by means of complicated phenomena, among which we must class processes of fermentation and life, according to Claude Bernard and Pasteur, is nothing else than the process of fermentation. That there exist in nature beings or lives that can live and thrive without air, even on our globe, was demonstrated by the same men of science. Pasteur found that many of the lower lives, such as vibriones and some microbes and bacteria, could exist without air, which, on the contrary, killed them. They derived the oxygen necessary for their multiplication from the various substances that surround them. He calls them aerobes, living on the tissues of our matter, while the latter has ceased to form a part of an integral and living whole, then called the very unscientifically by science dead matter and anaerobes. The one kind binds oxygen and contributes vastly to the destruction of animal life and vegetable tissues, furnishing to the atmosphere materials which enter later on into the constitution of other organisms. The other destroys, or rather annihilates, finally, the so-called organic substance, ultimate decay being impossible without their participation. Certain germ cells, such as those of yeast, develop and multiply in air, but when deprived of it, they will adapt themselves to life without air and become ferments, absorbing oxygen from substances coming in contact with them and thereby ruining the latter. The cells in fruit, when lacking free oxygen, act as ferments and stimulate fermentation. Therefore, the vegetable cell manifests in this case its life as an anaerobic being. Why, then, should an organic cell form in this case an exception? Asked Professor Bogolubov. Pasteur shows that in the substance of our tissues and organs, the cell, not finding sufficient oxygen for itself, stimulates fermentation in the same way as the fruit cell, and Claude Bernard thought that Pasteur's idea of the formation of ferments found its application and corroboration in the fact that urea increases in the blood during strangulation. Life, therefore, is everywhere in the universe, and occultism teaches us it is also in the atom. Also see infra at the close of this section. Fire alone is one on the plane of the one reality, on that of manifested, hence elusive being. Its particles are fiery lives which live and have their being at the expense of every other life that they consume. Therefore, they are named the devourers. Every visible thing in this universe was built by such lives, front conscious and divine primordial man, down to the unconscious agents that construct matter. From the one life, formless and uncreate, proceeds the universe of lives. First was manifested from the deep, chaos, cold, luminous fire, gaseous light, which formed the curds in space. Irresolvable nebulae, perhaps? These fought, and a great heat was developed by the encountering and collision which produced rotation. Then came the first manifested material, fire, the hot flames, the wanderers in heaven, comets. Heat generates moist vapor that forms solid water. Then dry mist, then liquid mist, watery, that puts out the luminous brightness of the pilgrims, comets, and forms solid watery wheels, matter, globes. Bahumi, the earth, appears with 6 sisters. Footnote. It is a Vedic teaching that there are 3 earths corresponding to 3 heavens, and our earth, the 4th, is called Bhumi. This is the explanation given by our exoteric Western Orientalist. But the esoteric meaning and allusion to it in the Vedas is that it refers to our planetary chain, 3 earths on the descending arc, and 3 heavens, which are the 3 earths or globes also, only far more ethereal, on the ascending or spiritual arc. By the first 3 we descend into matter, by the other 3 we ascend into spirit. The lower one, Bhumi, our earth, forming the turning point, so to say, and containing potentiality as much of spirit as it does of matter. We shall treat of this hereafter. And again, this is 3, 3, and 1, right? This leans into what I believe, according to my interpretation anyway. These produce by their continuous motion the inferior fire, heat, and an aqueous mist, which yields the 3rd world element, water, and from the breath of all atmospheric air is born. These 4 are the 4 lives of the first 4 periods, rounds, of Manvantara. The 3 last will follow. This means that every new round develops one of the compound elements, as now known to science, which rejects the primitive nomenclature, preferring to subdivide them into constituents. If nature is the ever-becoming on the manifested plane, then those elements are to be regarded in the same light. They have to evolve, progress, and increase to the manvantaric end. Thus, the first round, we are taught, developed but one element, and in nature and humanity in what may be called one aspect of nature, called by some, very unscientifically, though it may be so de facto, one-dimensional space. And that is what I talk about too, right? The one dimension being a singular point of existence. It is the individualized atom, right? That is what I say. The second round brought forth and developed 2 elements, fire and earth, and its humanity, adapted to this condition of nature, if we can give the name humanity to beings living under conditions unknown to men, was, to use again a familiar phrase in a strictly figurative sense, the only way in which it can be used correctly, a 2-dimensional species. And I say no, right? The second dimension would be growth, right? There you have the ability to exist, that is 1. The ability to grow, that is 2, right? Plants grow. They grow in one direction primarily. They do grow out a little bit, but they do not have the capacity to just move. That would be the 3rd realm of existence. Length, right? You have the dimension of existence, you have the dimension of width and height, and then you have the dimension of width, height, and depth. Depth being movement. And so this again leans more into what I believe in the theory of spiritual evolution. We will see how it plays out the rest of the way, because the 3 into the 4 makes the difference. So the processes of natural development, which we are now considering, will at once elucidate and discredit the fashion of speculating on the attributes of 2, 3, and 4, or more dimensional space. But in passing, it is worth to point out that the real significance of the sound but incomplete intuition that has prompted, among spiritualists and theosophists, and several great men of science, for the matter that, we have a footnote. Professor Zollner's theory has been more than welcomed by several scientists who are spiritualists, Professors Butleroff and Wagner of St. Petersburg, for instance. The use of the modern expression, the 4th dimension of space, to begin with, of course, the superficial absurdity of assuming that space itself is measurable in any direction is of little consequence. No, it is measurable. It is, right? I can measure from here to the door. I can measure that. That is measurable. Now, what you're referring to is not having a center from which to measure from, but that is a relative point. The center is always going to be relative in an infinite universe. So there are more than 2 dimensions. There are more than 3 dimensions. There are more than 4 dimensions, right? In my estimation, at least, you have existence, you have growth, you have movement, you have thought, you have time, you have mastery of thought, you have mastery of time, right? The ability to not just recognize time, but to see forward and backwards in perfection. That is the 7th plane of existence to me. You don't have to believe that, but that is what I believe. It is speculation because, of course, it cannot be proven, although it is at least logically sound in my estimation. We have talked about the theory of spiritual evolution quite considerably, so I'm not going to hammer it too hard here, even though we will probably be getting back into it in just a minute, right? But to say that there is no measurable, that is stupid, right? That is purely foolishness. It is measurable. I can literally measure 3 feet from me. The familiar phrase can only be an abbreviation of the fuller form, the 4th dimension of matter and space. Footnote: the giving reality to abstractions is the error of realism. Space and time are frequently viewed as separated from all the concrete experiences of the mind, instead of being generalizations of these in certain aspects. That is because space is separated from the mind. I understand that you believe everything is an illusion, but I don't, right? I believe that we are literally here. I believe that you can touch things, right? That is not an illusion. That is a reality. And I do believe that we will be going somewheres when the soul departs this temple, right? But that doesn't make this an illusion. You can view it that way, but it doesn't make it so. It is a speculation, and it will remain so. But it is an unhappy phrase, even thus expanded, because while it is perfectly true that the progress of evolution may be destined to introduce us to new characteristics of matter, those with which we are already familiar are really more numerous than the 3 dimensions. Yes, the faculties, or what is perhaps the best available term, the characteristics of matter, must clearly bear a direct relation always to the senses of man. Matter has extension, color, motion, molecular motion, taste, and smell, corresponding to the existing senses of man, and by the time that it fully develops the next characteristic, let us call it for the moment permeability, this will correspond to the next sense of man, let us call it normal clairvoyance. That would be the ability to see through time. Thus, when some bold thinkers have been thirsting for a 4th dimension to explain the passage of matter through matter and the production of knots upon an endless cord, what they were really in want of was a 6th characteristic of matter. The 3 dimensions belong, really, but to one attribute or characteristic of matter. Extension, and popular common sense, justly rebels against the idea that under any condition of things there can be more than 3 of such dimensions as length, breadth, and thickness. These terms, and the term dimension itself, all belong to one plane of thought, to one stage of evolution, to one characteristic of matter. So long as there are footholds within the resources of cosmos to apply to matter, so long will they be able to measure it 3 ways and no more. We can measure time. We can only measure it going backwards, but that is because we're only on the 5th dimension. And from the time the idea of measurement first occupied a place in human understanding, it has been possible to apply measurement in 3 directions and no more. But these considerations do not militate in any way against the certainty that in the progress of time, as the faculties of humanity are multiplied, so will the characteristics of matter be multiplied also. Meanwhile, the expression is far more incorrect than even the familiar one of the sun rising or setting. We now return to the consideration of material evolution through the rounds. Matter, in the second round, it has been stated, may be figuratively referred to as two-dimensional. But here, another caveat must be entered. That loose and figurative expression may be regarded, in one plane of thought, as we have just seen, as equivalent to the second characteristic of matter corresponding to the second perceptive faculty or sense of man. But these two linked scales of evolution are concerned with the processes going on within the limits of a single round. The succession of primary aspects of nature with which the succession of rounds is concerned has to do, as already indicated, with the development of the elements in the occult sense. Fire, air, water, earth. Footnote on water. The order in which the elements are placed above is the correct one for esoteric purposes and in the secret teachings. Milton was right when he spoke of the powers of fire, air, water, earth. The earth, such as we know it now, had no existence before the fourth round, hundreds of millions of years ago. The commencement of our geological earth. The globe was fiery, cool, and radiant, as its ethereal men and animals during the first round, says the commentary, uttering a contradiction or paradox in the opinion of our present science. Luminous and more dense and heavy during the second round, watery during the third. Thus, the elements are reversed. And again, that is all speculation. We are only in the fourth round, and our catalog so far stops short. I would say we are in the fifth. Fight me. The centers of consciousness, destined to develop into humanity as we know it, of the third round arrived at a perception of the third element, water. Water, again, as a footnote. If we had to frame our conclusions according to the data furnished to us by the geologist, then we would say that there was no real water. Even during the Carboniferous period, we are told that gigantic masses of carbon, which existed firmly spread in the atmosphere as carbonic acid, were absorbed by plants, while a large proportion of that gas was mixed in the water. Now, if this be so, and we have to believe that all the carbonic acid which went to compose those plants that formed bituminous coal, lignite, etc., and went towards the formation of limestone, and so on, that all this was at that period in the atmosphere in gaseous form, then there must have been seas and oceans of liquid carbonic acid. But how then could the Carboniferous period be preceded by the Devonian and Silurian ages, those of fishes and mollusks, on that assumption? Barometric pressure, moreover, must have exceeded several hundred times the pressure of our present atmosphere. How could organisms, even so simple as those of certain fishes and mollusks, stand that? There is a curious work by Blanchard on the origin of life, wherein he shows some strange contradictions and confusions in the theories of his colleagues, and which we recommend to the reader's attention. Those of the fourth round have added earth as a state of matter to their stock, as well as the other three elements in their present transformation. In short, none of the so-called elements were, in the three preceding rounds, as they are now. For all we know, fire may have been pure akasa, the first matter of the magnum opus of the creators and builders, that astral light, which the paradoxical Eliphas Levi calls in one breath the body of the Holy Ghost, and in the next, Baphomet, the androgyne goat of Mendes. That is, right, this is almost certainly plasma, right? Fire is plasma. It is the exothermic reaction from the change in chemical status of the original organic materials, right? It is quite literally watching the form change. It is visible in its limited scope according to the materials which are presented to it, but plasma is that change, right? It is not what we refer to as solid matter. It is the fifth state is what they call it, but You have solid, liquid, and gas, or the fourth state, because you have solid, liquid, and gas and plasma. Plasma is the point of change in between. Now for the footnote. Eliphas Levi shows it very truly a force in nature, by means of which a single man who can master it might throw the world into confusion and transform its face. Yes, for it is the great arcanum of transcending magic. That is quite literally it, right? When you manipulate the electromagnetic forces of creation, you are moving inactive plasma. And so, if you have the mastery, you can indeed do this. Quoting the words of the great Western Kabbalist in their translated form, see The Mysteries of Magic by A.E. White. That is the guy that did the tarot, if you didn't know. We may explain them, perhaps, the better by the occasional addition of a word or two to show the difference between Western and Eastern explanations of the same subject. The author says of the great magic agent, this ambient and all-penetrating fluid, this ray detached from the central or spiritual sun's splendor, fixed by the weight of the atmosphere and the power of central attraction, the astral light, this electromagnetic ether, or plasma, this vital and luminous caloric, is represented on ancient monuments by the girdle of Isis, which twines round two poles in an ancient Theogonies by the serpent devouring its own tail, emblem of prudence and of Saturn, emblem of infinity, immortality, and Chronos, time. Not the god Saturn or the planet. It is the winged dragon of Medea, the double serpent of Caduceus, and the tempter of Genesis. But it is also the brazen snake of Moses encircling the Tao. Lastly, it is the devil of exoteric dogmatism, and it is really the blind force. It is not blind, and Levi knew it, which souls must conquer in order to detach themselves from the chains of earth. For, if they should not, they will be absorbed by the same power which first produced them, and will return to the central and eternal fire. This great Archaeus is now discovered by, and only for, one man, Mr. J.W. Keeley of Philadelphia. For others, however, it is discovered, yet must remain almost useless. So far shalt thou go. All the above is as practical as it is correct, save one error, which we will explain in the text further on. Eliphas Levi commits a great blunder in always identifying the astral light with what we call a kasa. What it really is will be given in Part 2 of Volume 2. Where was that footnote at? All the way up here. Okay. Air, simply nitrogen. The breath of the supporters of the heavenly dome, as the Mohammedan mystics call it. Water, that primordial fluid which was required, according to Moses, to make a living soul with. And this may account for the flagrant discrepancies and unscientific statements found in Genesis. Separate the first from the second chapter, read the former as a scripture of the Elohist, and the latter as that of the far younger Jehovahist. Still, one finds, if one reads between the lines, the same order in which things created appear, namely, fire, light, air, water, and man, or the earth. For the sentence, "In the beginning God created heaven and earth," is a mistranslation. It is not heaven and earth, but the duplex or dual heaven, the upper and lower heavens, or the separation of primordial substance that was light in its upper and dark in its lower portions, or the manifested universe, in its duality of the invisible to the senses and the visible to our perceptions. God divided the light from the darkness, verse 4, and then made the firmament, air, 5, a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. It says, let it divide the waters below from the waters above, and I believe that that is our atmosphere, right? The part that we are currently residing in. There are waters below, which is water, and there are waters above, which is space or undifferentiated, unenergized plasma, and there is us here in the firmament, which is oxygen. It is not a hard shell placed around the globe or the plane if you're stupid. It is indeed the electromagnetic perturbations which keep this particular part as a gas as opposed to a solid or a liquid. Or the to us invisible planes of being. In the second chapter, the Jehovistic, plants and herbs are created before water, just as in the first. Light is produced before the sun. God made the earth and the heavens and every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. For the Elohim, gods, had not caused it to rain upon the earth. That's not saying that, right? Light is produced before the sun. We don't have that in Genesis. God made the earth and the heavens and every plant in the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. This is not a good translation. For the gods had not caused it to rain upon the earth. An absurdity, unless the esoteric explanation is accepted. The plants were created before they were in the earth, for there was no earth then, such as it is now, and the herb of the field was in existence before it grew as it does now in the fourth round. All right, here we're going to talk about another conspiracy. There is a conspiracy of the vapor canopy. It is entirely possible, although not even provable, as far as I can tell, that at one point in history, probably before the Eden event, that there was no rain for a variety of reasons, but instead that there was a super dense vapor, which is like our atmosphere, but a little bit heavier, right? It contained not quite fog, but consider it to be humidity to 99% of relative, right? So it is not quite condensing to the point where you see it as a fog or as rain, but it is an omnipresent liquid suspended in the air. And that from that was the emanations from the sun were distorted in different ways, and the most popular of the vapor canopy proponents that I am aware of, this is the explanation for the megafauna, right? The things that we no longer can really grow, like elephants being one of the megafauna that we have, whales being another megafauna. The whales being only capable of being alive because they are in the seas, right? But it is an explanation for the dinosaurs and for the mammoths and like saber-toothed cats and those giganto animals, right? That is the explanation, is because the vapor canopy was denser and the light was distributed differently, and therefore the pressure differentials were different, right? In order for that to be the case all the time, our 32 millibars would probably have to be closer to 60. That is the best explanation for that particular conspiracy, in my estimation, right? Somebody else may have a better explanation. If so, link it down below. We will talk about that because it is an interesting concept, right? It is, again, something that we can't really prove, though. It is always going to be speculation because we cannot go back there and see it. There may be ways to determine it, but most of that somehow is buried under not just a couple feet, but like several hundred feet of accumulation. Now, it is entirely possible that between the Eden event and now, because I put the vapor canopy closer to the Eden event than the flood event for various reasons. It is entirely possible that at that point that there was something from outside of here that came. Now, it is entirely possible that it was the flood event 6,000 years ago and not 12,000 years ago. But what appears to have happened for the flood event was that the waters below and the waters above permeated and changed the composition. That is at least equally possible as it happening in 12,000 years. If it happened at the 12,000 year mark, it was an accumulation. Like, there are in space, right? We are traveling through space. This is a known thing. We don't really know the destination or even the origination point, but we can determine that we are moving through space. Not just this planet, but the sun as well, right? The sun is moving. We revolve around. All of it is moving at once. We have just recently, in like the last 4 or 5 years, passed from one region of space into another one. Most people are unaware of this, but if you pay attention to the sun, you will notice the last, give it a decade, right? The last decade or so, the sun has been more intense than it used to be. The color has changed. It is less yellow, more white. People have differing reasons for that, but the one that I believe is that we passed into a different region of space. The region of space that we just left was slightly more dense. There were particulates of whatever nature separating us and the sun, like between us. It was like a fog. Now, whether that was water or whether that was carbon, that is my go-to, right? Or whether it was some other elemental array, is really kind of inconsequential, but it was like a fog in space. And we passed through that, and we are now out of it. This is pretty scientifically conclusive. This happened. It is entirely possible that 12,000 years ago, we passed through a region like that that was mud, right? Was soil, as we think of it. And that the accumulation that we experienced passing through this cloud of soil gave us more soil on the planet, which would change the rotation, which would change the harmonics, which would change the atmospheric pressure even. And that accumulation can attribute to what they call the mud flood, right? If you are on the Tartaria mud flood side of things, there is an explanation for it. It is entirely possible that it is true, but almost every single instance of, well, this was Tartarian architecture, is false. Most of that would be lost to the annals of time. We don't dig that far, but that is probably the explanation for coal, right? To bury the amount of organic material that would have to be buried under immense layers of dirt does not come from mere tectonic disruptions, right? It's not merely the tectonic plates shifting that caused all of this plant life to be buried under earth. It just doesn't work that way. It is possible through the flood, through sedimentary condensation, but again, it is not very probable. What is more probable to have happened during the flood is that we passed through a section of space that had more water, right? It was a fog of water as opposed to soil. This is all speculation, but it is probably the best explanation for these things. And so, there was no earth then, such as now? Yeah, that is entirely possible. But the herb of the field was in existence before it grows? That is not. All right. Discussing and explaining the nature of the visible elements and the primordial fire mentioned above, Eliphas Levi calls it invariably the astral light. It is the grand agent magique with him. Undeniably, it is so, but only so far as black magic is concerned, and on the lowest planes of what we call ether, the noumena of which is akasa. And even this would be held incorrect by orthodox occultists. The astral light is simply the older sidereal light of Paracelsus, and to say that everything which exists has been evolved from it, and it preserves and reproduces all forms, as he writes, is to enunciate truth only in the second proposition. The first is erroneous. For if all that exists was evolved through, or via, it is not the astral light. The latter is not the container of all things, but only the reflector. And best of all, Eliphas Levi writes, the great magic agent is the fourth emanation of the life principle. We say it is the first in the inner and the second in the outer, or universe, of which the sun is the third form, for the day star, the sun, is only the reflection and material shadow of the central sun of truth, which illuminates the intellectual, invisible world of spirit, and which itself is but a gleam borrowed from the absolute. There is another sun, right? Now, I do not hold to most of the other realms. I don't hold that there is a more perfected earth, for instance. But I do believe that there is a different point of light emanation. The way that I can express this so that it is understandable is that in meditation, right? We did the turning of the light. I forget what it is exactly called, but it is something along the lines of the golden sun. That is an internal light, right? Not eternal, but internal. When you are in a meditative practice, if you are doing it correctly, there will be a point in which a light comes to you. You can be sitting in a completely dark room with no outside influence whatsoever. Say you were in that box inside of the pyramid. While you are in there doing your meditative practices, this light will reveal itself to you. It is bright. It is overwhelmingly bright. And until you can learn to turn that light, which we talked about in that particular series of videos, until you can learn to use that light, it is overpowering, right? Once you are able to use that light, it is a lot less overpowering. You still see it. When it first appears, it is going to be blinding every single time, right? But the blinding part kind of goes away the more used to it you get. It happens, you're blinded, and then you assimilate to it quicker or adjust to it quicker. That is literally the great magic agent. That is literally this, right? You do not get to that point until you have gone through the three lower and at least into the fourth, which would be the heart. When you're moving from the heart to the throat, you will find it, period, every time. If you are not, you're not doing it correctly, period, every time. I say that with certainty, right? I don't care what system you follow. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. If you are not encountering this light, you are doing it wrong. Which leads me to believe, by what she is saying here, that she was doing it wrong, right? The latter is not the container of all things, but only the reflector. The great magical element is the fourth emanation. It is, right? This light is centered around the heart because the heart is the binder, right? We are above the heart. We are in the fifth dimension, which would be the throat, the expressive. But in order to actualize what that really means, you have to pass through that light. You have to pull from the bottom. You have to balance the shadow aspects before you can get to the spiritual aspects. This, to me, shows that Eliphas probably knew more of what he was talking about, right? This particular phrase right here, he's had some things that I disagreed with. We've been through them. But this part right here, I fully, right, maybe not exactly the way that it is worded, but the intent behind this, right, he is attempting to couch knowledge in allegory. This is probably closer to correct, right? To differentiate that light from the creative process is not going to work at all, right? That light is literally the plasma, right? We talk about the plasma all of the time. Plasma and the Holy Spirit are the same thing to me, right? It is everything. It is all of it tied into one. Me moving my arms is moving through the plasma, Right? The plasma allows that movement to happen. It is the electrical impulses that take my expressed desire as the soul and translate it to the temple so that the now can become the next. Magic, in the way that I do, the things that I talk about, the processes by which I have healed myself in very real and measurable ways, is dealing with this light exclusively. Right? Now, this light is not only the light, it is also the darkness. It is both at the same time. It is the overwhelming brightness and the overwhelming darkness of creative existence. It is the dipoles of creation, light and dark. And you have to use both of them, right? If you are only focusing upon this light, you are not doing it correctly either. If you are attempting to make your chakra pure, brilliant, bright white light, you are doing it wrong. So far, he is right enough. But when the great authority of the Western Kabbalists adds that, nevertheless, it is not the immortal spirit, as the Indian hierophants have imagined, we answer that he slanders the said hierophants, as they have said nothing of the kind, while even the Puranic esoteric writings flatly contradict the assertion. No Hindu has ever mistaken Prakriti, the astral light, being only above the lowest plane of Prakriti, the material cosmos, for the immortal spirit. Prakriti is ever called Maya, illusion, and is doomed to disappear with the rest, the gods included, at the hour of the pralaya, for it is shown that Akasa is not even the ether. Least of all, then, we imagine, can it be the astral light. Those unable to penetrate beyond the dead letter of the Puranas have occasionally confused Akasa with Prakriti, with ether, and even with the visible sky. It is not the visible sky. It is true, also, that those who have invariably translated the term Akasa by ether, Wilson, for instance, finding it called the material cause of sound, possessing, moreover, this one single property, Vishnu Purana, have ignorantly imagined it to be material in the physical sense. True, again, that if the characteristics are accepted literally, then, since nothing material or physical, and therefore conditioned and temporary, can be immortal, according to metaphysics and philosophy, it would follow that Akasa is neither infinite nor immortal. But all this is erroneous, since both the words pradhana, primeval matter, and sound, as a property, have been misunderstood. The former term, pradhana, being certainly synonymous with mula prakriti and akasa, and the latter, sound, with the verbum, the word or the logos. This is easy to demonstrate, for it is shown in the following sentences in Vishnu Purana. In the beginning there was neither day nor night, nor sky nor earth, nor darkness nor light, save only one, unapprehensible by intellect, or that which is Brahma and Pums, spirit, and Pradhana, primordial matter. Book 1, Chapter 2. Now, what is Pradhana if it is not Mula Prakriti, the root of all, in another aspect? For Pradhana, though said further on to merge into the deity as everything else does, in order to leave the one absolute during the pralaya, yet is held as infinite and immortal. The commentator describes the deity as one Pradhanika Brahma spirit that was, and interprets the compound term as substantive, not as a derivative word used attributively. In example, like something conjoined with pradhana. See footnote. The student has to note, moreover, that the Purana is a dualistic system, not evolutionary, and that, in this respect, far more will be found from an esoteric standpoint in Sankhya, and even in the Manava Dharma Sastra, however much the latter differs from the former. Hence, Pradhana, even in the Puranas, is an aspect of Parabrahman, not an evolution, and must be the same as the Vedantic Mula Prakriti. Prakriti, in its primary state, is akasa, says a Vedantin scholar. See 5 Years of Theosophy, page 169. It is almost abstract nature. Akasa, then, is pradhana in another form, and, as such, cannot be ether, the ever-invisible agent courted by even physical science. Nor is it astral light. It is, as said, the noumenon of the sevenfold differentiated Prakriti. Footnote. In the Sankhya philosophy, the 7 Prakritis, or productive productions, are Mahat, Ahamkara, and the 5 Tanmatras. See Sankhya Karika 3, and the commentary thereon. Now, this again to me is going to be the chakras, right? The sevenfold differentiated leading into the astral. Right? The ever immaculate mother and the fatherless son who becomes father on the lower manifested plane. For Mahat is the first product of Pradhana, or Akasa, and Mahat, universal intelligence, whose characteristic property is Buddhi, is no other than Logos, for he is called Eswara Brahma, Bhava, etc. See Lingua Purana, and Vayu Purana, but especially the former Purana, prior section. He is, in short, the creator, or the divine mind in creative operation. The cause of all things. He is the firstborn, of whom the Puranas tell us that Mahat and Matter are the inner and outer boundaries of the universe, in our language, the negative and the positive poles of a dual nature. Abstract and concrete, for the Purana adds, in this manner, as were the 7 forms, principles of Prakriti reckoned from Mahat to earth, so at the time of Pralaya, Pratayahara, these 7 successively re-enter into each other. The egg of Brahma, Sarva Mandala, is dissolved with its 7 zones, Dvipa, 7 oceans, 7 regions, etc. Vishnu Purana, Book 6. These are the reasons why the occultists refuse to give the name of the astral light to Akasa, or to call it ether. In my father's house are many mansions, may be contrasted with the occult saying, in our mother's house there are 7 mansions, or planes, the lowest of which is above or around us, the astral light. No. This is entirely possible, right? In her mother's house there are 7 mansions, but this is absolutely not what he was talking about here. He said, I leave you to go to my father's house where there are many mansions. Right? That's what he was talking about. He was talking about not here. Right? This could be within my mother's house there are 7 mansions. Right? That is entirely acceptable. You are reading into this something that is not probably there by saying that this is the same. No. The elements, whether simple or compound, could not have remained the same since the commencement of the evolution of our chain. Everything in the universe progresses steadily in the great cycle, while incessantly going up and down in the smaller cycles. Nature is never stationary during Manvantara, as it is ever becoming. See footnote. Wait, we missed a footnote? Where was that at? Oh, all the way up there. No use. No, this is the first footnote not related to what we were just reading. No use to say so to the Hindis, who know their Puranas by heart, but very useful to remind our Orientalists, and those Westerns who regard Wilson's translations as authoritative, that in his English translation of the Vishnu Purana, he is guilty of the most ludicrous contradictions and errors. So, on this identical subject of the 7 Prakritis, or the 7 zones of Brahma's egg, the 2 accounts differ totally. In Volume 1, page 4, the egg is said to be externally invested by 7 envelopes. Wilson comments by water, air, fire, ether, and ahamkara, which last word does not exist in the Sanskrit texts. And in Volume 5, page 198 of the same Vishnu Purana, it is written, in this manner were the 7 forms of nature, Prakriti, reckoned from Mahat to earth. Between Mahat and Mahabudhi and water, etc., the difference is very considerable. And now to the becoming footnote. According to the great metaphysician Hegel, also, for him nature was a perpetual becoming, a purely esoteric conception. Creation, or origin, in the Christian sense of the term, is absolutely unthinkable. As the above quoted thinker said, God, the universal spirit, objectivizes himself as nature, and again rises out of it. And it is ever becoming, not simply being, and mineral, vegetable, and human life are always adopting their organisms to the then reigning elements. And therefore, those elements were then fitted for them as they are now for life of present humanity. It will only be in the next, or fifth round, that the fifth element, ether, the gross body of Akasa, if it can be called even that, will, by becoming a familiar fact of nature to all men, as air is familiar to us now, cease to be as at present hypothetical, and also as agent for so many things. And only during that round will those higher senses, the growth and development of which Akasa subserves, be susceptible to a complete expansion. As already indicated, a partial familiarity with the characteristic of matter, permeability, which should be developed concurrently with the sixth sense, may be expected to develop at the proper period in this round. But with the next element added to our resources in the next round, permeability will become so manifest a characteristic of matter that the densest forms of this will seem to man's perceptions as obstructive to him as a thick fog, and no more. Let us return to the life cycle now. Without entering at length upon the description given of the higher lives, we must direct our attention at present simply to the earthly beings and the earth itself. The latter, we are told, is built up for the first round by the devourers, which disintegrate and differentiate the germs of other lives and the elements. Pretty much, it must be supposed, as in the present stage of the world, the aerobes do when undermining and loosening the chemical structure in an organism. They transform animal matter and generate substances that vary in their constitutions. Thus, occultism disposes of the so-called Azoic age of science, for it shows that there was never was a time when the earth was without life upon it. No, it speculates that, but it does not show that, right? That is an extrapolation. Wherever there is an atom, well, okay, if you are considering atoms as life, which I do, then yes, but if you are considering biological life, no. Wherever there is an atom of matter, a particle or a molecule, even in its most gaseous condition, there is life in it, however latent and unconscious. Okay, I do agree with that. Whatever quits the laya state becomes active life. It is drawn into the vortex of motion, the alchemical solvent of life. Spirit and matter are the two states of the one, which is neither spirit nor matter, both being the absolute life latent. Book of the Daizan, Commentary 3, paragraph 18. Spirit is the first differentiation of, and in, space, and matter the first differentiation of spirit. That which is neither spirit nor matter, that is it, the causeless cause of spirit and matter, which are the cause of cosmos, and that which we call one life, or the intra-cosmic breath. Once more, we will say, like must produce like. Absolute life cannot produce an inorganic atom, whether single or complex, and there is life even in laya, just as a man, in a profound cataleptic state, to all appearance a corpse, is still a living being. When the devourers, in whom the men of science are invited to see, with some show of reason, atoms of the fire mist, if they will, as the occultist will offer no objection to this. When the devourers, we say, have differentiated the fire atoms by a peculiar progress of segmentation, The latter becomes life germs, which aggregate according to the laws of cohesion and affinity. When the life germs produce lives of another kind, which work on the structure of our globes, see footnote, how is that 4? All right. Speaking of it in the preface to the History of Magic, Eliphas Levi says, "It is through this force that all the nervous centers secretly communicate with each other." Yes, I believe that. From it, that sympathy and antipathy are born. From it, that we have our dreams, and that the phenomena of second sight and extranatural visions take place. Astral light, acting under the impulsion of powerful wills, destroys, coagulates, separates, breaks, gathers in all things. God created it on that day when he said, "Fiat lux," which is directed by the egregores. In example, the chiefs of the soul, who are the spirits of energy and action. Eliphas Levi ought to have added that the astral light, or primordial substance, if matter at all, is that which, called light, lux, esoterically explained, is the body of those spirits themselves and their very essence. Our physical light is the manifestation on our plane, and the reflected radiance of the divine light emanating from the collective body of those who are called the lights and the flames. But no other Kabbalist has ever had the talent of heaping up one contradiction on the other, of making one paradox chase another in the same sentence in such flowing language as Eliphas Levi. He leads his reader through the most lovely, gorgeously blooming valleys to strand him after all on a desert and barren rocky island. Thus, in the first round, the globe, having been built by primitive fire lives, in example formed into a sphere, had no solidity nor qualifications, save a cold brightness, nor form nor color. It is only towards the end of the first round that it developed one element which, from its inorganic, so to say, or simple essence, became now, in our round, the fire we know throughout the system. The earth was in her first rupa, the essence of which is the Akashic principle named blank. That which is now known as, and very erroneously termed, astral light, which Eliphas Levi calls the imagination of nature, probably to avoid giving its correct name, as others do. It is through and from the radiations of the 7 bodies of the 7 orders of Dhyanis that the 7 discrete quantities, elements, whose motion and harmonious union produce the manifested universe of matter, are born. Commentary. The second round brings into manifestation the second element, air, that element, the purity of which would ensure continuous life to him who would use it. There have been 2 occultists only in Europe who have discovered and even partially applied it in practice, though its composition has always been known among the highest Eastern initiates. The ozone of the modern chemist is poison compared to the real universal solvent, which could never be thought of unless it existed in nature. From the second round, Earth, hitherto a fetus in the matrix of space, began its real existence. It had developed individual, sentient life. Its second principle, the second corresponds to the 6th principle. The second is life continuous, the other temporary. The third round developed the third principle, water, while the 4th transformed the gaseous fluids and plastic form of our globe into the hard, crusted, grossly material sphere we are living on. Bhumi has reached her 4th principle. To this it may be objected that the law of analogy, so much insisted upon, is broken. Not at all. Earth will reach her true ultimate form, inversely in this to man, her body shell, only towards the end of Manvantara, after the 7th round. Eugenius Philanthes was right when he assured his readers, on his word of honor, that no one had yet seen the earth, in example, matter in its essential form. Our globe is, so far, in its Kamarupic state, the astral body of desires of ahamkara, dark egotism, the progeny of Mahat on the lower plane. It is not molecularly constituted matter, least of all the human body. That is the grossest of all our principles, but verily the middle principle, the real animal center, whereas our body is but its shell, the irresponsible factor and medium through which the beast in us acts all its life. Every intellectual theosophist will understand my real meaning. Thus, the idea that the human tabernacle is built by countless lives, just in the same way as the rocky crust of our earth was, has nothing repulsive in it for the true mystic. Nor can science oppose the occult teaching, for it is not because the microscope will ever fail to detect the ultimate living atom or life that it can reject the doctrine. C. Science teaches us that the living, as well as the dead organisms of both man and animal, are swarming with bacteria of 100 various kinds, more than that. That from without we are threatened with the invasion of microbes with every breath we draw, and from within by leucomanes, aerobes, anaerobes, and whatnot. But science never yet went so far as to assert with the occult doctrine that our bodies, as well as those of animals, plants, and stones, are themselves altogether built up of such beings, which, except larger species, no microscope can detect. We have come a long way in technology. So far as regards the purely animal and material portion of man, science is on its way to discoveries that will go far towards corroborating this theory. Chemistry and physiology are the two great magicians of the future who are destined to open the eyes of mankind to the great physical truths. With every day, the identity between animal and physical man, between the plant and man, and even between the reptile and its nest, the rock and man, is more and more clearly shown. The physical and chemical constituents of all being found to be identical, chemical science may well say that there is no difference between the matter which composes the ox and that which forms the man. But the occult doctrine is far more explicit. It says, not only the chemical compounds are the same, but the same infinitesimal invisible lives compose the atoms of the bodies of the mountain and the daisy, of man and the ant, of the elephant and of the tree which shelters him from the sun. Each particle, whether you call it organic or inorganic, is a life. Every atom and molecule in the universe is both life-giving and death-giving to that form, inasmuch as it builds by aggregation universes and the inferior vehicles ready to receive the transmigrating soul, and as eternally destroys and changes the forms and expels those souls from their temporary abodes. It creates and kills. It is self-generating and self-destroying. It brings into being and annihilates that mystery of mysteries, the living body of man, animal, or plant, every second in time and space. And it generates equally life and death, beauty and ugliness, good and bad, and even the agreeable and disagreeable, the beneficent and maleficent sensations. It is that mysterious life, represented collectively by countless myriads of lives, that show in its own sporadic way the hitherto incomprehensible law of atavism, that copies family resemblances as well as those it finds impressed in the aura of the generators of every future human being. A mystery, in short, that will receive fuller attention elsewhere. For the present, one instance may be cited in illustration. Modern science finds out that ptomaine, the alkaloid poison generated by decaying matter and corpses, a life also, extracted with the help of a volatile ether, yields a smell as strong and equal to that of the freshest orange blossoms. But that free from oxygen, these alkaloids yield a most sickening, disgusting smell, or the most agreeable aroma which recalls that of the most delicately scented flowers. And it is suspected that such blossoms owe their agreeable smell to the poisonous ptomaine, the venomous essence of certain mushrooms, fungi, being nearly identical with the venom of the cobra of India, the most deadly of serpents. Footnote. The French savants Arnaud, Gautier, and Villiers have found in the saliva of living men the same venomous alkaloid as in that of the toad, the salamander, the cobra, and the trigonocephalus of Portugal. 3 heads? That's what trigonocephalus means, right? 3 heads? It is proven that the venom of the deadliest kind, whether called potamine or leucomane or alkaloid, is generated by living men, animals, and plants. The same savant, Gautier, discovered an alkaloid in the fresh meat of an ox and in its brains, and a venom which he calls xanthocreatinine, similar to the substance extracted from the poisonous saliva of reptiles. It is the muscular tissues, as being the most active organ in the animal economy, that are suspected of being the generators or factors of venoms, having the same importance as carbonic acid and urea in the functions of life, which venoms are the ultimate products of inner combustion. And though it is not yet fully determined whether poisons can be generated by the animal system of living beings, without the participation and interference of microbes, it is ascertained that the animal does produce venomous substances in its physiological or living state. Thus, having discovered the effects, science has to find their primary causes. And this it can never do without the help of the old sciences, of alchemy, occult botany, and physics. We are taught that every physiological change, in addition to pathological phenomena, diseases, nay, life itself, or rather the objective phenomena of life, produced by certain conditions and changes in the tissues of the body, which allow and force life to act in that body, that all this is due to those unseen creators and destroyers that are called in such a loose and general way microbes. It might be supposed that these fiery lives and the microbes of science are identical. This is not true. The fiery lives are the 7th and highest subdivision of the plane of matter, and correspond in the individual with the one life of the universe, though only on that plane. The microbes of science are the first and lowest subdivision on the second plane, that of material prana, or life. The physical body of man undergoes a complete change of structure every 7 years, and its destruction and preservation are due to the alternate function of the fiery lives as destroyers and builders. They are builders by sacrificing themselves in the form of vitality to restrain the destructive influence of the microbes, and by supplying the microbes with what is necessary, they compel them, under that restraint, to build up the material body and its cells. They are destroyers. Also, when that restraint is removed and the microbes, unsupplied with vital constructive energy, are left to run riot as destructive agents. Thus, during the first half of a man's life, the first 5 periods of 7 years each, the fiery lives are indirectly engaged in the process of building up man's material body. Life is on the ascending scale, and the force is used in construction and increase. After this period is past, the age of retrogression commences, and the work of the fiery lives, exhausting their strength, the work of destruction and decrease, also commences. An analogy between cosmic events and the descent of spirit into matter for the first half of Manvantara, planetary as human, and its ascent at the expense of matter in the second half, may here be traced. These considerations have to do solely with the plane of matter, but the restraining influence of the fiery lives on the lowest subdivision of the second plane, the microbes, is confirmed by the fact mentioned in the footnote on Pasteur, vide supra, that the cells of the organs, when they do not find sufficient oxygen for themselves, adapt themselves to the condition and form ferments, which, by absorbing oxygen from substances coming in contact with them, ruin the latter. Thus, the process is commenced by one cell robbing its neighbor of the source of its vitality when the supply is insufficient, and the ruin so commenced steadily progresses. Such experimenters as Pasteur are the best friends and helpers of the destroyers and the worst enemies of the creators, if the latter were not at the same time destroyers too. However it may be, one thing is sure in this: the knowledge of these primary causes of the ultimate essence of every element, of its lives, their functions, properties, and conditions of change, constitutes the basis of magic. Paracelsus was, perhaps, the only occultist in Europe during the last century since the Christian era who was versed in this mystery. Had not a criminal hand put an end to his life years before the time allotted him by nature, physiological magic would have fewer secrets for the civilized world than it has now. But what has the moon to do in all of this, we may be asked? What have fish, sun, and moon, in the apocalyptic saying of the stanza, to do with company in the life microbes? With the latter, nothing, except availing themselves of the tabernacle of clay prepared by them. With divine perfect man, everything, since fish, sun, and moon make conjointly the three symbols of the immortal being. This is all that can be given, nor does the writer pretend to know more of this strange symbol than may be inferred about it from the exoteric religions, from the mystery, perhaps, which underlies the Matsya fish. Alright, Avatar of Vishnu, the Chaldean Oannes, the man-fish, recorded in the imperishable sign of the zodiac, Pisces, and running throughout the two testaments in the personages of Yeshua, son of the fish, Nun, and Yeshua, the allegorical sin, or fall of spirit into matter, and the moon, insofar as it relates to the lunar ancestors, the Pitras. If you are confused why I said this name as Yeshua, you should fall back to the Bible study, where you will find out that this word and this word are literally the same word. For the present, it may be as well to remind the reader that while the moon goddesses were connected in every mythology, especially the Grecian, with childbirth, because of the lunar influence on women and conception, the occult and actual connections of our satellite with fecundation is to this day unknown to physiology, which regards every popular practice in this reference as gross superstition. We have talked already in another part about how, while the moon and women's cycles do have the same period, there is alternation about what that means, right? If the moon was purely the cause of fecundation, then at the same period of the moon, every woman would be in the exact same position of fertility. That is not a reality, right? Women have different cycles, and while the periodicity does indeed correspond to the moon, and there may even be a link there, it is not a direct one. As it is useless to discuss them in detail, we may only stop at present to discuss the lunar symbology casually, to show that the said superstition belongs to the most ancient beliefs, and even to Judaism, the basis of Christianity. That is arguable. That Judaism is the base of Christianity. Right. That's the arguable part. With the Israelites, the chief function of Jehovah was child-giving. That is also arguable. And the esotericism of the Bible, interpreted Kabbalistically, shows undeniably the Holy of Holies in the temple to be only the symbol of the womb. That is, again, like, I have not studied Kabbalah extensively, so it may be referred to Kabbalistically, but that is not what the Bible says. This is now proven beyond doubt and cavil by the numerical reading of the Bible in general, and of Genesis especially. Remember how we talked that the gematria is not a good thing to get into? That is why. That is one of the very many reasons why. This idea must certainly have been borrowed by the Jews from the Egyptians and Indians, whose Holy of Holies was, and with the latter is to this day, symbolized by the Greek king's chamber in the Grand Pyramid. We had an alternative for that, didn't we? See Source of Measures and the yoni symbols of the exoteric Hinduism, to make the whole clearer, and to show at the same time the enormous difference in the spirit of interpretation and the original meaning of the same symbols between the ancient Eastern occultist and the Jewish Kabbalist. We refer the reader to Book 2, The Holy of Holies. We have not got there yet, but that is coming very soon. Footnote. Phallic worship has developed only with the loss of the keys to the true meaning of the symbols. That I agree with. It was the last and most fatal turning point from the highway of truth and divine knowledge into the side path of fiction, raised into dogma through human falsification and hierarchic ambition. Stanza 7, 6. From the firstborn, primitive or the first man, the thread between the silent watcher and his shadow becomes more strong and radiant with every change. Reincarnation. The morning's sunlight has changed into noonday glory. This sentence, the thread between the silent watcher and his shadow, man, becomes stronger with every reincarnation, is another psychological mystery that will find its explanation in Book 2, which we will be getting to. For the present, it will suffice to say that the watcher and his shadows, the latter numbering at as many as there are reincarnations for the monad, are one. The watcher, or the divine prototype, is at the upper rung of the ladder of being, the shadow at the lower. Withal, the monad of the every living being, unless his moral turpitude breaks the connection and runs loose and astray into the lunar path, to use the occult expression, is an individual Diane Kohan, distinct from the others, a kind of spiritual individuality of its own, during one special manvantara. Its primary, the spirit, Atman, is one, of course, with Paramatma, the one universal spirit. But the vehicle, Vahan, it is enshrined in, the Buddhi, is part and parcel of that Diane Kohanic essence. It is in this that lies the mystery of the ubiquity, which was discussed a few pages back. My Father that is in heaven and I are one, says the Christian Scripture. In this, at any rate, is the faithful echo of the esoteric tenet. Stanza 7, 7. This is thy present will, said the flame to the spark. Thou art myself, my image and my shadow. I have clothed myself in thee, and thou art my Vahan, vehicle, to the day. Be with us, when thou shalt re-become myself and others, thyself and me. Then the builders, having donated their first clothing, descend on radiant earth and reign over men, who are themselves. The day when the spark will re-become the flame, man will merge into his Diane Kohan, myself and others, thyself and me, as the stanza has it, means this. In paranirvana, when pralaya will have reduced not only material and cyclical bodies, but even spiritual egos to their original principle, the past, present, and even future humanities, like all things, will be one and the same. Everything will have re-entered the great breath. In other words, everything will be merged in Brahma, or the divine unity. Is this annihilation, as some think, or atheism, as other critics, the worshippers of a personal deity and believers in an unphilosophical paradise, are inclined to suppose? Neither. It is worse than useless to return to the question of implied atheism in that which is spirituality of a most refined character. To see in nirvana annihilation amounts to saying of a man plunged in a sound, dreamless sleep, one that leaves no impression on the physical memory and blurring, because the sleeper's higher self is in its original state of absolute consciousness during those hours. that he, too, is annihilated. The latter simile answers only to one side of the question, the most material, since reabsorption is by no means such a dreamless sleep, but, on the contrary, absolute existence, an unconditioned unity or a state, to describe which human language is absolutely and hopelessly inadequate. The only approach to anything like a comprehensive conception of it can be attempted solely in the panoramic visions of the soul, through spiritual ideations of the divine monad, nor is the individuality, nor even the essence of the personality, if any be left behind, lost, because reabsorbed. For, however limitless, from a human standpoint, the paranirvanic state, it has yet a limit in eternity. Once reached, the same monad will re-emerge therefrom as a still higher being on a far higher plane, to recommence its cycle of perfected activity. The human mind cannot, in its present stage of development, transcend, scarcely reach this plane of thought. It totters here, on the brink of incomprehensible absoluteness and eternity. And I'm going to pause here for a personal note that I have been there. You may not think so, she may not have thought so, but I know that I have been there, right? Through the meditative process and manipulating the energies, I have achieved this. Can I do it every time? No. That is not something that's probably more along the lines of mastery, but in order to reach the stage of adept where I am, I had to have done this. This was part of the release that I was talking about earlier, right? It is literally giving the soul back to the divine for the understanding of this. So, the Watchers reign over man during the whole period of Satya Yuga and the smaller subsequent yugas down to the beginning of the third root race, after which it is the patriarchs, heroes, and the mains, see Egyptian dynasties enumerated by the priest to Solon, the incarnated Dionys of a lower order, up to King Menes and the human kings of other nations. All were recorded carefully. In the views of symbologists, this mythopoeic age is of course only regarded as a fairy tale. But since traditions and even chronicles of such dynasties of divine kings, of gods reigning over men, followed by dynasties of heroes or giants, exist in the annals of every nation, it is difficult to understand how all the peoples under the sun, some of whom are separated by vast oceans and belong to different hemispheres, such as the ancient Peruvians and Mexicans, as well as the Chaldeans, could have worked out the same fairy tales in the same order of events. That is probably explained by the 12,000-year disaster cycle and things that we have already talked about here. Footnote. See the sacred mysteries among the Mayas and the Quiche, 11,500 years ago. 12,000-year disaster cycle, anyone? By Auguste de Plongeon, who shows the identity between the Egyptian rites and beliefs of those of the people he describes. The ancient hieratic alphabets of the Maya and the Egyptians are almost identical. However, as the secret doctrine teaches history, which for being esoteric and traditional is nonetheless more reliable than profane history, we are entitled to our beliefs as anyone else, whether religionist or skeptic. And that doctrine says that the Dhyani Buddhas of the two higher groups, namely the Watchers or the Architects, furnished the many and various races with divine kings and leaders. It is the latter who taught humanity their arts and sciences, and the former who revealed to the incarnated monads that had just shaken off their vehicles of the lower kingdoms, and who had, therefore, lost every recollection of their divine origin, the great spiritual truths of the transcendental worlds. See Book 2, Divine Dynasties. Thus, as expressed in the stanza, the Watchers descended on earth and reigned over men who are themselves. The reigning kings had finished their cycle on earth and other worlds in the preceding rounds. In the future Manvantaras, they will have risen to higher systems than our planetary world, and it is the elect of our humanity, the pioneers on the hard and difficult path of progress, who will take the places of their predecessors. The next great Manvantara will witness the men of our own life cycle becoming the instructors and guides of a mankind whose monads may now yet be imprisoned, semi-conscious, in the most intellectual of the animal kingdom, while their lower principles will be animating, perhaps, the highest specimens of the vegetable world. This leads into the theory of spiritual evolution that I propose, right? I believe that there are animals that are just below us and are above other animals. The trainable animals. Horses, dogs, pigs. There are several of the apes, many of the apes. Those are trainable animals. They can be taught a small measure of thought, which is really what differentiates us, and time, which is another differentiating point, right? Like the fourth dimension, those animals that are trainable have a small measure of thought, not really time. We have the measure of time, which sets us above them. It is entirely possible that those in the fourth level, in the next round, will become the sentient beings that we are now, and that we, being now sentient, will become something along the elementary. That is entirely possible, right? That would be in accordance with my particular theory. Not to say that mine is necessarily the correct, but it definitely lines up with many of the things proposed in here. Thus proceeds the cycles of the septenary evolution. In septennial nature, the spiritual or divine, the psychic or semi-divine, the intellectual, the passional, the instinctual or congenital, the semi-corporeal, and the purely material and physical natures. All these evolve and progress cyclically, passing from one into another in a double, centrifugal, and centripetal way. One in their ultimate essence, seven in their aspects. The lowest, of course, is the one depending upon and subservient to our five physical senses. See footnote. Which are, in truth, seven, as shown later on the authority of the oldest Upanishads. This is an interesting one, right? I'm looking forward to that because I've been contemplating this myself. As if you are aware, I'm attempting to write a book. And I am writing a book. I'm not just attempting it. But one of the difficulties that I am having is expressing this, right? We know the senses, right? There is taste, touch, smell, sight, and sound. That is five. I believe that there are more, right? At least one more, which would be the external sense. Now, you can probably overlay those five with chakras. Not going to bother with that right now. But have you ever been driving a car, right? Most people have. And you're going maybe a little bit over the speed limit, right? And you come across a curve, and when you take the curve, you can feel the tires just about to give ground, right? You can feel, if I don't let off of the gas right now, I'm probably going to skid out. That is an extrasensory perception. That is you taking on the perception of the vehicle. This happens in other ways as well. And one of the ways by which I was forced to isolate the electrical energies was through this sense perception. Now, I express this as isometrics because if you are unaware of what isometrics are, it is using your own resistance in exercise. Briefly, right? An expression of that is, if I were to put my hand on this wall and push as hard as I can, the wall resists me, right? If I join my two hands together in one of these, what is it, a mudra, where the hands make difference. But if you put these two together, you can take your left hand or your right hand, but I'm going to use my left, and I can push, right? Well, if I push both together, that forms a resistance for myself. If I do it and I will myself to push, and then imagine and will the resistance, I can do the same thing. It works the same muscles. It incorporates the same energetic impulse, but there is no actual resistance there. That is the extension of the sixth sense, in the exact same way that you extend it to the car when you're making the curve. It is through this involuntary or voluntary electrical resistance, not physical resistance, but the resistance of mind, that I am able to manipulate these forces. Now, other people may do it a different way. This is the way that I was forced to find. Some people imagine, right? I can't do that. Some people visualize. Not a possibility for me. But I can conceptualize the resistance. Through that, I have been able to conceptualize the manipulation of the energies. Another way to express that in one of the five senses that we already have is modulating vocal tones, right? If I am going to speak in my lower tone, I have to intentionally set that as a lower tone. If I'm going to speak in a higher tone, I have to formulate the resistance to tighten the chords intellectually. It is the exact same procedure to go from here to here that is the same as pushing the energy from here to there. To me, that is an isometric reaction. Doing this is the exact same as doing that. Somebody's going to pick up on that. And if you are this far along in this particular study, you deserve to get that early. Thus far, for individual, human, sentient animal, and vegetable life, each the microcosm of the higher macrocosm, the same for the universe, which manifest periodically for purposes of the collective progress of the countless lives, the outbreathings of the one life, in order that through the ever-becoming, every cosmic atom in this infinite universe, passing from the formless and the intangible, through the mixed natures of the semi-terrestrial, down to matter and full generation, and then back again, reascending at each new period, higher and nearer the final goal. That each atom, we say, may reach through individual merits and efforts that plane where it re-becomes the one unconditioned all. But between the Alpha and the Omega, there is the weary road, edged in by thorns, that goes down first and winds uphill all the way, yes, to the very end. Starting upon the long journey, immaculate, descending more and more into sinful matter, and having connected himself with every atom in manifested space, the pilgrim, having struggled through and suffered in every form of life and being, is only at the bottom of the valley of matter, and half through his cycle when he has identified himself with collective humanity. This he has made in his own image, in order to progress upwards and homewards, up the spiral of choice. The God has now to ascend the weary uphill path of the Golgotha of life. It is the martyrdom of self-conscious existence, the place of the skull. I wonder what that could represent. Like Visvakarman, he has to sacrifice himself to himself in order to redeem all creatures, to resurrect from the many into the one life. Then he ascends into heaven indeed, where, plunged into the incomprehensible absolute being and bliss of parinirvana, he reigns unconditionally, and whence he will redescend again at the next coming, which one portion of humanity expects in its dead-letter sense as the second advent, and the other as the last Kalki avatar. And that is going to bring us to the end of stanza 7. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. I am here to try and express as clearly and as openly as possible the path by which I have at least achieved adepthood, right? I can manipulate these energies. I have done so within myself.
I can talk right here, but I can't do it like for an extended period. The only reason I can do that
is because of the electromagnetics that I have manipulated in myself to remove a cyst from my throat. This is an extended process, right? Maybe one day I will rest the energy there and it will heal automatically and overnight, but that has not been the case for anything that I've healed so far. I am willing to take the time that it takes and not to rush it.
But I have done it.
I have healed my throat. I've healed my shoulder. I am healing my spine. The things that I can do physically now, I was unable to do a year ago, much less 5 years ago. The things that I am relaying are things that I have done. They may be speculations. It could be purely a figment of my imagination, but I have the proofs, right? At least to myself. And so I am trying to relay how I do it as clearly as I possibly can. And some of that is understanding some of the harder concepts. Some of that is going to disagree heartily with what is written in other places. And if you don't want to believe that, that's fine, right? I am here to tell, not to convince. That is something that I stand upon, right? I am required to give the information. I am not required to hammer it into your skull. If you want to pick it up and experiment with it, you will probably find results. I cannot say for sure because it may just be me. There are so many factors that make me differentiated from other people that it could be the combination of all of them. I don't know. But I don't believe so. I do believe that anything that I can do, you can do better. And I really do believe that. Mainly because I am limited by the beliefs that I grew up with. So it is entirely possible that someone who is not limited by them same beliefs would be able to do more than I can. I don't deal with the angels, right? I've opened myself up to that. I have no takers. I don't deal with the elementals. Again, I have opened myself up to that. I don't have any takers. And so maybe someone who is less restricted in their thoughts would be more open and would be more receptive. That is entirely possible. I do not discount them. I just haven't had the experience with them that the other people claim to have. And so I don't deal with that, right? We don't deal with hierarchical magic. I don't deal with calling on angels to heal you. God has shown me how to do that without them. And so that is what I am here to show. A great part of that is going to be that isometrics. It really is. I am working on how to properly relay that. But when I get it, the book will be almost done. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that I stated, drop it in the comments. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have another work that you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. It's on this side, huh? Hit me with that super thanks because the bills do not pay themselves.
To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.